Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and today's conversation has to do with the mistakes that you need to watch out for. You need to have coherence in your final document, but there are a lot of other things that can go wrong, things that you can plan for, work towards not having happen to you. And these are the things that cause you a lot of time at the end. So the purpose of today's webinar is to help all of you be more efficient and at the end when you need it most. Our quotes. This is from Alice Lamott, who's written a book on editing. Almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. You need to start somewhere. Start by getting something, anything down on paper, or in our case, on the computer. A friend of mine says that the first draft is the down draft. You just get it down. The second draft is the up draft. You fix it up. You try to say what you have said more accurately. And the third draft is the dental draft, where you check every tooth to see if it's loose or cramped or decayed or even, God help us, healthy. Christopher Nolan is a video movie editor, but I think his words also have something about our editing. You always discover a lot in the editing room, particularly the action, because you have to overshoot a lot and shoot an enormous amount of material because many of the sequences have to be discovered in the editing and manipulation of it. And our writing, we always overwrite. And then our editing has to do with cutting it down, making it coherent, pulling it together, and getting it really where we want it to go. Our agenda today is to look more closely at those kinds of things that don't pass, or those that pass, but they're not really very good, so that the review committee requires a lot of edits. Revision, then we're going to go into what is revision, what is editing, what is copy editing, where do you go for help, and what's up with us at MastersNet and DoctoralNet. So let's take a look more closely at those that don't pass. Now, if you've seen the webinar video on passing, acing your defense or Viva, you've seen this slide and the next one before. These are from the Barbara Lovitz, who did a lot of research with faculty members about what are the qualities of the work that they either find unacceptable, acceptable, or very good. We're going to focus today on the downside of that. We focused in the ace your defense on the upside, trying to get you to see what you have to do to make yours those top-notch pieces. But now let's see what you have to watch out for. And this is the list. Poorly written, spelling and grammatical errors, sloppy presentation. I don't have to read it for you, but some of these things we can avoid. Some of these things your supervisor or committee chair should not have let you get very far if they were still true. And some of these have to do with perhaps something that is a mistaken concept in your head that you haven't quite rooted out yet. And we'll talk about which ones and what we can do about each. The what is acceptable list is more like it doesn't inspire our enthusiasm to think of our work as workmanlike or demonstrating technical competence. On the other hand, these are the qualities that people pass. So there are doctors out there in the world whose writing was pedestrian and plodding, who had a weak structure and organization, whose scope was narrow, who had a question that wasn't exciting or was an extension of the advisor's work, and so therefore didn't seem all that much like their own, who displayed only a narrow understanding of their field. However, I don't think any of us want that for ourselves. You do need to be able to sustain an argument, but we also want the arguments to be somewhat imaginative, complex, and convincing. We all need to demonstrate some understanding of theory at a simple level. And in fairness, if there's any one thing that people are a little more workmanlike on than anything else, it's theory. So, everything here is fine, and there will be some things here we can do better easily. So, the first question I need to ask is whether or not you're making the most of the easy help. For instance, the has spelling and grammatical errors, that's the first thing on the unacceptable list, might have been something that you could kind of understand before there were technical tools as strong as there are. But Microsoft Word is very good at catching grammar and spelling errors. You could turn up all of their options. But also there's Grammarly, and I find Grammarly excellent for giving options that are perhaps more robust than those I see in Word. So the two things kind of compete with each other. Make sure you have them turned on, not necessarily when you write, but definitely when you edit. Sloppy presentation. Well, you avoid that by using the template, the Microsoft Word template that is based on the style that your university requires. And the two styles generally throughout the world are either Harvard in Europe and the Pacific Rim, I think, and APA in the United States. Now, there are other styles and there are other templates, but the easy thing is to find a template on the internet that is the template for that style, and then to bring it into Microsoft Word styles, and then if you have a document that you're already working on, no problem, just change the style or theme in that document to the one based on this new template. Now that takes a little figuring out, but Word has good tutorials, and and also everything is in YouTube with somebody telling us how to do it. Does not understand, well, we can't, tools aren't going to help you understand, but if you are think you have any chance that you've missed any relevant literature, for heaven's sakes, include your librarian as a resource in your work. And the easy thing to do is to reread the references in everything you have read to make sure you know the work that their work depended upon, and that sets up the bottom half of your ladder. And then you can go to Google actually, and you can find and ResearchGate, and you can find out who is quoting the references, who are citing the references that you are using, and then they might be the next level of work that you want to look into. Once again, it's pretty easy now that the internet tracks every citation we get from everything we publish to find out whose work goes beyond ours. Now, some of these things can be done with a group or a writing buddy. Always trying to look for how doctoral students can get through without spending any extra or very little extra money. And sometimes there's no way around it, especially at the end. But these ideas of careful thought, has data that are flawed, wrong, false, fudged, or misinterpreted, has wrong, inappropriate, incoherent, or confused analysis, includes results that are obvious, unexplained, or misinterpreted, has unsupported or exaggerated interpretation, or has a weak structure and organization. Those are all things that have to do with the fact that you have stuff in your head that are difficult to get down in words. because you've never talked to the academic language long enough to make it come out right. And we've all been in places, goodness knows it's very human to not say exactly what we mean. So you know what you mean. I don't think that your data are flawed or that your analysis is inappropriate or incoherent, but you may sound like that in your written word. And that's the point where writing groups, writing buddies, working with others really can make a difference. And we're going to be testing out how some of that can happen in our international group this summer with meetups. But it's an important thing to be able to work with somebody else. You share your work, they share their work, and you're both of you looking at a specific thing. So if you both have data, then you'll spend a time period looking at how the data makes the argument. And you'll come back with questions to your writing buddy and then you'll see things that you, the writer, will see things that you would have never seen because somebody who's really on your side, because you're on their side, doesn't quite understand what you're saying. And that will help you catch all of these different things. So if you haven't found someone you can work with and you're interested in having someone to work with, why don't we start a conversation? I'll do it in big marker afterwards, and we can just add some names to something. I'll put it to the top, and maybe we can see who's interested, and we can begin, and then watch also for meetups. So we have a map to success. We use the tools we've already talked about to improve our work as it goes along. Then we employ targeted group work whenever possible. And that helps your thinking and your writing to your thinking. Then you have the full document, like Nikki, who's in the room with us, just completed her first full draft. And the next three things have to do with that: revision, editing, and copy editing. So that's our map. Revision. It takes all writing higher. Remember our quotes at the beginning. Things don't happen the first time well. So the word revision means to see it again. And we have to put aside any ego that has developed about our work before we revise, and then very much before we edit. So without ego, you neutrally sit down and you read a section out loud. And you let multiple parts of your brain work when you're both talking and reading. That will help you catch run-on sentences, fragment sentences, redundancies, just things not flowing well. And then I have a number of, and then you can look at all these different, you can revise in all these different ways. You can revise in general, you can revise because your committee chair or supervisor sent you feedback. You can revise on particular focus, or because you want your evidence to come out stronger. All of those are live links on the PDF that comes attached to this video, or they're also available through the second link here. So these are three very good resources I want to give you about revision. It's the first process. It's the process that moves you from your first writing into the final document and publication. You still have your normal writing hat on for these. And this second one will give you all the links from Walden University that I've put up here. And I put them up here because they were very good. They have checklists to consider. They have what you need to think of about that particular subtopic. Pat Thompson talks about how revision is just part of the game, but it's not part we talk about very much. And And then this other university has just a really good document for their paper, for their students on how to revise. Okay, now the biggest thing you may not consider about revision is that it takes time. Probably 3 times more time than you have or than you think of having. So the biggest hint I can give you about revision is do it all the way along. Don't skimp on the time it takes. Don't think you can get back to it later. Make it a priority throughout your writing. Now, of course, you may or may not have done that, but you may be done and you may be on to the editing phase, even if it is not well revised. So editing is done with a completely different brain than the revision brain. In revising, we're still mostly in our writer's voice. We're thinking about all the thoughts that go into what we want to say. Editing is much more like a task that needs to be done. It's like doing the dishes. So when you do the dishes, you don't just put the pots and pans and the silverware and the plates and cups all in the same dishwater. You plot it out so that you get everything clean in an orderly way that also feeds into your setup of your kitchen around your house. Not a bad analogy, actually, for editing. Only you go in the opposite direction. You start with the pans. I suggest, and of course it can be done the other way, but I think it's far less tedious to go from big to little. So what are the big ideas? Well, that's your golden thread. That's your cogent argument. That's the what goes where. So you want to look at the full document. You want to check your headings. You want to make sure that the single idea your reader absolutely must know irrevocably when they come to the end of your document shows up everywhere, and that it shows up appropriately, and that you've backed it up with data so that your argument is strong. Then you move to a smaller edit where you're checking for redundancy and section by section. Did I say this in in chapter 1? Have I told it again? You want to make sure that when you are not exactly repeating yourself, but when you are reminding your reader of something that was said before, you do it in a way that is not redundant, but is exactly the same meaning. And I'll say this again at the end, but the single biggest challenge with internal consistency kills you in viva or defense. Lack of it kills you. And so because you are up against people who look for tiny mistakes. Somebody on your committee will be the person who really cares that you said it this way in one chapter and you said it this way in another chapter, but she or he does not define those two words to mean exactly the same thing. So can you say more about that? And that's the kind of conversation you really don't want your committee to have, because you want them to have the higher conversation about the worth and significance of your work. So do the check. Check for redundancy, check for internal consistency. If you say it more than once, do you always say it the same way, or using words that are in fact closely related? There are some things you must make sure you say exactly the same way in your research question or those. And if some dissertations or thesis would have the research question in every chapter, it can be completely appropriate to do so, but please don't ever, ever, ever say it two different ways. Make sure that your final edit on those questions gets put everywhere. So then you've got internal consistency and you're pretty comfortable with your argument that you're making overall. Now you need to get to, do your headings to the paragraphs points make sense? Every paragraph has a point of its own. It doesn't have more than one. All those points add up to what the heading suggested to the reader they would add up to. So there's a heading check Do all the headings make sense and add up to your chapter? Do the paragraphs points make sense and add up to your headings? And do your sentence by sentence make sense and add up to the point of that paragraph? Now that takes time. And it takes a particular kind of head to literally say, does this go to this, this go to this? And you really can't do it, or I can't do it anyway, an hour, 2 hours max. This is the kind of work you have to put in all the time because it takes a long time, but you get sloppy if you stay with it for too long. I've talked about consistency, and I need to draw it into the concept of what is an argument. So an argument is the brick that your ideas are the mortar. So the argument is the claim that you're making, the evidence that fits that claim, or the lit that applies to it, depending on your topic or where you are in the document. The discussion, the warrant that wraps the evidence to the claim, and a discussion also of any contrary evidence, so that at the end you're saying, even though this contrary evidence exists, we still see that this warrant, the evidence that leads to the claim is stronger, therefore this claim can be made. Now that's the simple step-by-step logic. Your paragraphs follow a very similar internal logic. You make a statement, you back up that statement, you lead the reader at the end to agree with the statement at the beginning. It's pretty common paragraph style. So then we get to the fact that your common and most detrimental mistake is if your claim in one section and you refer to it slightly differently in another section, and you aren't aware that the claim A does not exactly equal claim B. And these are the kinds of challenges that I see frequently because you're on a train track and you're getting this thing done, and you don't have the time to sit back and reflect and really, and it's a big document. 200 pages is a lot to keep always in space. So don't give yourself a hard time when you find these things, but make sure you're thinking about them. And I've given you some references here on editing, some from Oxford and Cambridge, all from universities, what they think you should be doing, well worth looking over. So then we get to the nitty-gritty, icky, awful, tiny stuff. And I found there's an international copy editing group, and they had this set of rules that I thought were really funny the way they put them, because they're all examples of what the rule says not to be. Be more or less specific. Use not bad grammars. Proofread carefully to see if you any words out. Don't use no double negatives. Now, you can read the rest at your leisure, but the ones in red are the ones that actually happen in dissertation or thesis land a lot. Some of the others happen a little. But avoid tumbling off the cliff of triteness into the dark abyss of overused metaphors. And I have to say my face is pink because this is something my writing tends to do. Take care of your verb and your subject is in agreement. Oh my goodness. How this is probably my single biggest edit when people work with me on coaching is verb subject agreement. Your data are plural. So get your data wers, data ares, these datas together. And just be really careful. It's an easy mistake to make when you write. Because we're typing, we don't always notice. And because we know what we want to say, we don't always see it when we read it. The passive voice should be used infrequently. In fact, in your writing, the passive voice and anthropomorphism should be used not at all. Passive is when you say should be, will do, that kind of verb usage, rather than an active verb. And often you can get rid of your passives by changing the first part of the sentence, the last part of the sentence, to the first part of the sentence. Do some juggling there. It takes juggling to bring up an active verb when you've had a passive one. Anthropomorphism, I don't think is on this list, but it's one you might want to look out for. Some academics are hypersensitive to if you say this study showed, because this study is an inanimate thing, and what it shows is an active verb, or proved, or did something like that. So you'll want to watch out for how you refer to your study and your research. That's the biggest place anthropomorphism comes in. Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are usually, but not always, an obstacle for readers and make it harder on readers even if you're being careful, etc. It's another really common problem in academia. We start an idea, we make a comment, we add to that idea, we make another comma, and we finish the idea. I don't mind the way it reads, but it is one that often will definitely get hit if you have readers who don't like it. So I have given you a number of links on copy editing. I think you'll like the WikiHow. It's done in pictures and fairly easy to go through. Not a bad idea to start a bit of editing, read one, start a bit of editing, read another, do a little bit more editing, to get your head into a space of being this critical about your own work, because it's not easy. Getting help. Now, not all universities allow you to get outside help at the editing stage. So the first thing you need to find out is whether or not it's legal, and if it's legal, what do they say about it? So, for instance, I was doing a web search, and one of the universities said, sure, you can get copy editing help, but you make sure that you are acknowledging the copy editing help in your acknowledgments. Those who are attending DCU policy is no copy editing, no outside help. And so that throws it back on you to do good work with other people. And it came from a person who paid for a copy editor, went to committee, and then when the committee wanted him to do something, he said, but I paid for a copy editor, it's got to be perfect. So now no one at the university can pay for copy editors because it caused a lot of brouhaha. But so these are some words about copy editing I thought you would want to know. If it is available to you, then it takes them about 2 to 5 pages an hour. So that's, you look at the number of pages you got, you can see that it's a lot of work. A page is 250 words with a 1-inch margin. Manuscripts with many problems will slow a copy editor down to a page an hour or a page and a half. Clean manuscripts may go as fast as 8 pages an hour. So there's the range. Copy editors usually move through a book more quickly than an article because they get used to what kinds of mistakes you make. And setting up to edit a manuscript takes 2 to 3 hours, which then goes into that cost. So the average rate at which copy editors edit is 4 pages an hour. So then you can look at your work and decide how many hours it is. She goes on to say, I don't know if I copied it here, she goes on to say that that she expects copy editing of thesis or dissertation to cost $2,000 to $2,500. Now, we are working really hard at Doctoral Net not to have that be true, but there's a lot of call for documents to get edited, especially when students don't speak English as a first language. But especially just to make sure that your brain already hurts from getting this done. So it's really nice to have an outside brain looking at it. So there are some terms you should be aware of. Copy editing is what happens when you're correcting the manuscript from the author. And I write books. I write books for Sage. Sage copy edits my books. So it's that space between manuscript and the publisher saying it's ready for publication. And it's part of the world. There's nothing wrong with copy editing. It's part of the writing world. But universities being what they are, there's a lot of thought about whether or not students should take part in this. Technical editing is when they're looking to correct misspellings, subject-verb agreement, incorrect verb tense, unnecessary or missing commas. Style editing involves standardizing a text according to a particular style. Correlation editing involves checking the related parts of a manuscript against each other. All those three are things that you can probably have an outside person do because they aren't going to substantively change your work. And so it's a gray area, because certainly somebody can look at whether or not you're following Harvard or APA style and help you with your references or do little bits and pieces, not necessarily the whole thing. Then there's this big one, which is substantive editing. And it is all of the above. And it's the one that takes a lot of time. It involves, to some extent, improving the logic or clarity of the document, but not in terms of rewriting it for you. With good editors, it means that they're looking at each section and helping you make sure it all adds up. Having this done in one shot with your document, for instance, I write a book, I send it to Sage, Sage sends it to a copy editor. The copy editor sends me pages and pages and pages of, don't you think you want this instead of this? Don't you think you want this instead of this? And you go through it all agreeing or disagreeing to those changes. And that's what this is all about. That you would not go to a copy editor and voila, your page, everything changed. It would be instead suggestions were made, and then you can go with them or not. So Doctoral Net has for a long time, Dr. Maria has helped with editing. She's very good, and it takes her a long time. So we've been looking for how can we work with a company as well, and then how can we together merge a system that is best for students. Less expensive perhaps than Maria looking at it, because it does take a long time, or but also perhaps using a system that makes use of machine learning, such as Grammarly, kinds of things, but at a higher level. So we are beginning a partnership with Inago. Inago is a copy editing company based in the Pacific Rim, and they specialized originally in China and the Pacific Rim in helping non-native English speakers get published in journals, because there was such a distance between the way English was taught and the way it was used in professional journals. So a master's student came forward, Master's of Engineering student came forward, a non-native English speaker, as it turned out. She delivered a document March 21st. It actually finally got back on April 2nd. They say 5 working days, but it's important to notice that's 5 working days, as in Monday through Friday. It came in on a Saturday and it had another weekend in the middle, which is why it appeared to take longer. These are things you have to think about when you're turning something in. How long will it take? When will they get it, etc. You have to be really good at that. Her document was 13.7 thousand words. It was substantively edited. And I've looked at the document substantially edited. Word usage was very much suggested different word usage, helping her not use the same word over and over and over again. English isn't her first language, and so really updating what was written to a level where the fact that English wasn't her first language would be insignificant. And when there were places in the document where the editor wasn't sure if the meaning would have changed too much, he made note of that, said, check this area. I'm not sure if I changed what you were trying to say. Another way of saying he wasn't sure what she was trying to say, and he made a sentence out of it to make sure that, but it might not have been the right sentence. Track changes were done so that she could see all the changes. The cost would have been $1,341. So there you have it. We have no particular stance as to whether students should involve themselves with services. There are good and bad things about it. My experience of editing is that no matter who it is, there will be other people who disagree completely with your edits. So it's not picture perfect, and it does cost quite a bit of money. But if the stakes are high and you want to do something as easily as possible and it's available to you, this is a completely legitimate upfront service, and we recommend it on that basis. So what have we said today? We've said that how do you need to hit the target? The target is the middle where your committee passes you with few or no changes. That's what you're going for. Substantive editing may be needed at the end to get there. Maybe not. Maybe you've done such a good job of the second level where you've done some serious editing. You've given it a lot of time. You've done it one piece at a time, big to little. And you have really, and you have good skills to begin with. These have made them even better. This is a great document. And that is a useful end point, especially if you have revised after each section. If you have not revised after each section, and goodness knows I certainly didn't when I was in your shoes, then the serious editing becomes much more difficult. And I did have my final document edited by a person who actually was employed part-time at Teachers College at Columbia. And I remember not being just excited by her edits, mostly word usage, sentence structure kinds of things. Every editor, every person has their own bias as to what's the most important thing in writing. So when you get help from the outside, what you get is a really good idea of their biases. Not a bad thing. I'm going to stop for a minute before I go into other tools you can consider and ask the people in the room, I've done a lot of talking today, sorry about that, for what questions you might have. Raise your hand if you have a question. No questions. I've been really clear. Okay, I will go on. If you have others, have you heard about anything from other people on this journey that you might want to share, get comments on? No, raise your hand if you're typing. No hands up. Okay. Tools. Oh, I gave you the same link twice. That's not very useful. If you go to webinars, follow that link, and you type in revision or editing, I think it turned out to be editing or edit, you'll get several webinars that are useful and interesting. Not on editing per se, but on the thoughts that you may be a little unclear of prior to editing. The what goes where, the how you build an argument, the how you make sure your problem is stated just right. Those kinds of conversations come into helping you edit those sections well. Then there are links here that are to the independent DoctoralNet site, main.doctoralnet. If you are a university member, you'll need to open that link and put in your university letters to do so. But the Academic Marathon series had a good piece about the routines you need, and definitely editing is a good time to base your life on routine. PhD Comic had a really good comic on revisions, which will keep your spirits up, I hope. And then we have a good piece of content on polishing your proposal for defense. There's also some box sets. We are going away on holiday, but we are also spending some time getting these box sets really done. Apologies for anybody who signed up for them before now, but they just were one of the things that kept sliding in our development for all kinds of reasons. So there are going to be a bunch of more box sets by the end of the month, and by the end of May, they should all be done and dusted. So go ahead, look them over again and sign up now. You'll get them soon. Academic Writing Once a Week Tips turns out to be our best email series. So if you go to opt-ins and you look for the Friday Academic Writing Tips, they're evidently really working well because we're having an amazing open rate. So people in the room are saying very positive and motivating. Vina had to leave, sorry, but good that you were able to attend the whole time. Makes it sound attainable and achievable if well planned. That's what I wanted to hear. Sarah, I thought you were leaving us early. Bye for now. And for the couple people left in, just a reminder, if you haven't gotten your app on, raise your hand if you've gotten your app. Yay! And you'll have to tell me what you think, Jane. So get your app on. Android and Apple links are there. Make sure you're scanning the webinars. We've got them up through this month into May, and then we'll be starting to work on summer. Summer is almost here from a scholastic point of view. Take a look at your summer. Plan out when you're going to give yourself some time, and then when you're going to be able to get your doctoral work done, master's work done. Backwards map if you need to. There's lots of tools. You can look for that in resources. And don't forget, Margie is always here to help you. So that is my section for today. Thank you for those watching by recording. I'm going to turn you off now so the people in the room can chat about anything they want to anonymously. Thank you all watching by recording as well. Okay, recording's